In the bustling, yet ominous heart of the town, where gossip was currency and judgment a pastime, the crowd gathered with an unhealthy curiosity. They knew something was about to unfold that would satisfy their craving for sensation and reaffirm their sense of superiority. It was the perfect stage for a public shaming, a scene ripe for drama. The father arrived, his face contorted with scorn and frustration. Behind him, like a shadow, dragged his daughter, a burden as he called her, utterly consumed by shame. Her plump figure, once a sign of health, now stood as a symbol of flaw in society's eyes. Every step was agony for her, and the crowd's stares burned her skin. The father's voice, sharp as a knife, sliced through the air. "Here she is, my disgrace, my fat daughter, not worth a penny, just a problem," he shouted, enumerating her supposed faults. With brutal indifference, he announced that he was giving her away as payment for his debts, treating her like an object, a soulless commodity, not a human being. These words, like poison, seeped into her soul, confirming her worst fears. In a final, shocking act of cruelty, her father brutally shoved her, casting her like a sack of potatoes at the feet of the assembled crowd. The impact with the hard ground was painful, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of public humiliation. She lay there, feeling worthless, broken, and utterly alone. Burden, disgrace, fat, these words echoed in her mind, forming a dirge of despair. The crowd responded with murmurs, a mix of shock, satisfaction, and indignation, but no one moved to help her. Their gazes were like stones, cast in her direction. They were looks of condemnation, amplified by whispers of her sin and imperfection. In their eyes, she saw confirmation of what her father had said. She was a burden, someone deserving of public scorn. This collective rejection was equally painful. Lying on the dirty ground, surrounded by indifference and hostility, the girl reached the depths of despair. The last sparks of hope extinguished in her heart. She was worthless, unloved, rejected by family and society. In this moment of total humiliation and solitude, she saw no future. She was a burden everyone wanted to cast off. Little did she know her fate was about to change. Suddenly, from the shadows of a narrow alleyway, emerged a tall, massive figure with a face hidden in the shadow of a wide hood. The whispering and judging crowd fell silent. It was the man from the mountains, a figure of fear and legend. His presence was a chilling gust in the inferno of public humiliation. He said not a word, nor did he look at the crowd. His sharp, inscrutable gaze settled on the girl lying on the ground. The imposed silence was heavy, dense, punctuated by the nervous breaths of the crowd and the pounding of her terrified heart. An unspoken question hung in the air. The father cleared his throat stiffly. "This is her, my payment for the debts," he said, gesturing towards his daughter. The man from the mountains remained silent. His hand slowly reached into a pouch. In the silence, coins jingled. He pulled out a handful of heavy silver coins and tossed them at the father's feet. They landed with a clatter in the dust where the girl had just lain. The father greedily bent to gather them. A swift, soulless, silent transaction. The girl felt her fate sealed, sold, this time without words of condemnation. As the father disappeared into the crowd, counting his silver, the man from the mountains moved. He stood over her, casting a long shadow. The girl cowered, bracing for further humiliation. Instead, she saw a large, strong hand extended towards her. Without judgment, it was a simple, unspoken offer of help. A gesture so unexpected and filled with quiet respect that she held her breath. For the first time in years, she was treated like a human being, not a burden. Her tear-filled eyes looked at his hand, then up at his face, still hidden in shadow. In that simple gesture, the first fragile spark of hope was born. Her trembling fingers slowly touched his rough yet non-threatening hand. With his help, the girl rose, feeling the weight of humiliation lift, free from scorn or judgment. He removed his thick woolen cloak, marked by a life in the mountains, and gently draped it over her shoulders. The material was heavy, warm, imbued with the scent of the forest, like being wrapped in protection. In this cold world, where every gesture from her father was an act of cruelty, the cloak became the first sign of dignity. She felt warmth spread through her chilled body, and with it, fragile hope, straightening her posture of shame. The crowd, moments ago feeding on her humiliation, now stood stunned. The whispers died down, replaced by a heavy silence. Their gazes, once like stones, were now questioning. They had expected further drama, but were instead witnessing something. So was an act of quiet respect. The man from the mountains remained silent, yet his actions spoke volumes. The crowd didn't know how to react. Their certain and brutal judgment had suddenly lost its foundation. In their eyes, the girl, though still a burden, had been uplifted. It was a new beginning no one expected, and they were its silent, bewildered, and powerless witnesses to the force that had emerged from the shadows. Without a word, the man from the mountains turned and moved towards the narrow alleyway. The girl, wrapped in his cloak, followed him. Each step took her further from public shame, leading her into the unknown. The crowd parted, forming a corridor of silence. No one dared to stop them or condemn them with a word. Their departure was quiet, almost invisible. In the girl's heart, fear mingled with fragile hope. She didn't know where she was going, but her destiny was shifting. She was leaving a world of cruelty and judgment, heading towards a new, uncertain future, where she would find dignity and her own strength, far from the burden of the past. As the wagon moved away from the town, Loti felt the weight of unseen gazes, though no one was there anymore. The jolting of the wheels echoed her father's cruel words, sold like an object, a burden to everyone. Fear constricted her throat, tears welled up. Beside her, the man remained silent. His stern, inscrutable presence was the only barrier against the return to hell. She didn't know what awaited her, but worse than the past seemed impossible. Her heart beat erratically, full of terror and distrust. She expected cruelty, for that was how she and those like her were treated. He remained silent, his heavy silence devoid of judgment. It was as if he saw more in her than mere cargo, perceiving a hidden strength. The road led deep into the wilderness, away from the familiar world. Each turn of the wagon pulled her further into the unknown, distancing her from her hurtful past. Tired, thirsty, her body ached from the humiliation. When the renegade protector stopped the wagon to water the horses, he handed her a water skin without a word. His hand, large and rough, performed a simple, unexpected gesture. He did not look with contempt, nor did he comment on her burden. He simply offered her water. It was a small thing, yet in a world where she was cargo, it became a spark in the darkness. Her distrust persisted, but a seed of wonder began to sprout. She watched him furtively, searching for cruelty, yet found only silence and focus, which offered a timid sense of security she had never known. They did not speak. Loti, taught the worthlessness of words and the importance of appearance, remained silent. The renegade protector was taciturn by nature, yet communication existed. In the evening, he built a fire with steady, efficient movements. When Loti shivered, he silently draped his blanket over her shoulders, imbued with the sense of smoke and the wild. There was no tenderness in it, but a practical respect. In his eyes, though he rarely looked at her, she saw no contempt, but understanding, as if he saw more in her than a burden. It was confusing, for her entire life she had been told of her worthlessness. His small gestures melted the ice of her terror, replacing it with uncertainty and a sense of security. She felt he was there to protect her, stirring a hope for a better tomorrow. The deeper they ventured into the mountains, the more distant and insignificant the hurtful world became. The air was cleaner, the silence deeper, the sky vaster. Lodi, who had spent her entire life under scrutiny and ridicule, felt invisible for the first time. It was a blessing. No one pointed a finger at her, no one whispered about her burden. The wilderness passed no judgment. She saw wild animals looking without prejudice, trees untouched by human cruelty. The journey was becoming a physical and emotional escape. She began to breathe more deeply, the tension in her shoulders easing. The renegade protector guided them through a new world, and she, though still full of apprehension, began to perceive beauty in the harsh reality. A path to a place where she could truly be herself without the mask of shame. After a long day's journey, the renegade protector lit a fire and prepared a simple meal. Loti expected to have to beg for food or to have it thrown to her like a dog, but he simply handed her a piece of dried meat and bread, without a word, without a look of pity or disgust. They ate in silence, with only the crackle of the fire to be heard. For Loti, who had felt like a burden and an object of shame her entire life, this simple act of sharing food was extraordinary. She felt strange, treated like a human being, not like an inferior, not like a problem, but like someone hungry and deserving of respect. This experience was more powerful than words of comfort. With each bite, a piece of the terror gave way to a sense of safety, a promise that this place would be different, free from judgment. Finally, after days of silent travel, as the sun began to set, the renegade protector stopped the wagon on a small rise. In the distance, hidden among the trees, stood a cabin, her sanctuary. For Loti, the sight was a mix of fear and relief, fear of the unknown, of the man she barely knew, but also relief that the journey was over, that a respite from fear and uncertainty had come. She felt that this place, though rustic, could be a chance to reclaim the dignity that society had denied her. A spark of hope, fragile as a candle flame, ignited in her heart. She had expected cruelty, but instead received practical, silent respect. Standing on the threshold of a new life, she wondered if this silent refuge would become her home, where her burden would transform into strength, and she would find her true self. The protagonist, still reeling from her father's brutality and the weight, shame, that pressed like a stone in her heart, found herself in a new, unfamiliar place. The hermit's cabin, though simple, felt surprisingly safe. Initially, she was disoriented and deeply distrustful, expecting another form of cruelty. Her burden of shame was still palpable, like invisible shackles restricting her movements and thoughts. She observed the hermit, this temido hombre da montaña, his silent, methodical actions, chopping wood, preparing meals. There were no words, only gestures. He pointed to a sleeping place, offered food. It was not another humiliation or linchamiento, as she was accustomed to. There was only silence and a surprising lack of judgment in his eyes. The protagonist, still feeling like a burden, learned basic tasks, timidly imitating him. Her inner dialogue was full of fears and uncertainty, but slowly she began to realize that this recluso, this renegade protector, was not as she had imagined him. A slow process of adaptation began, though her heart still trembled with fear and shame of being rejected again. He simply was, and his presence, though silent, offered a strange form of dignity she had never experienced before, giving her hope. Days passed in the slow, methodical rhythm of simple daily tasks that marked the passage of time in the hermit's cabin. The hermit, without unnecessary words, but with unwavering patience, taught her how to chop wood, gather berries in the forest, and care for the few animals. Initially, the protagonist was clumsy and inept, making mistakes, and the old shame and feeling of being a burden tried to overwhelm her again, whispering that she was worthless. Each failed attempt reminded her of the cruelty of the past and how society perceived her burden. But he didn't scold her. He simply showed her again, with a patience that was utterly new to her. When she finally managed to light a fire, bake her first, albeit somewhat crooked, loaf of bread, or fix something in the cabin, a tiny spark of dignity appeared in her heart. These were small personal victories over her own ineptitude and internal conviction of worthlessness. She began to see that her strength lay not in her appearance, but in her ability to act, to create, to survive. The hermit, this renegade protector, noticed her efforts, not through praise, but through a satisfied nod, by allowing her to perform more and more tasks. Her hands grew stronger and her mind calmer, free from the constant fear of linchamiento, building loyalty. With each passing day, the protagonist began to actively participate in the cabin's life, no longer a passive observer. She started waking earlier on her own to help with morning chores, even surprising herself with her newfound energy. Her initiative, though initially timid, became increasingly apparent. She stopped feeling like a useless burden and began to see herself as valuable help, an essential element of this small world. She saw how her work, preparing meals, maintaining order, contributed to the common good, to keeping their small sanctuary in harmony. The hermit, the recluso, though still silent, began to rely on her presence and her work. This built within her a sense of worth and dignity that had been brutally stripped away by her father's cruelty and the community's public linchamiento. Her thoughts increasingly revolved around how different this life was from the one she had known. Here, her size was not a cause for shame, and her physical strength became an asset. The renegade protector taught her, through his actions, that her value was internal, not superficial, giving her forgiveness for who society had told her to be. She began to understand that loyalty was not forced, but born of respect and mutual trust. As time passed, the protagonist began to notice small but significant gestures from the hermit that went beyond mere practicality. These were moments that, though unspoken, spoke more than 1,000 declarations. When she returned from the forest cold and tired, a hot meal and a blanket were always waiting for her, prepared without question. When she cut herself while chopping wood, he bandaged her wound with uncommon gentleness, though still in silence. These silent gestures were an absolute novelty for her. No one had ever treated her with such care, kindness, and selfless respect. She understood that this was not forgiveness for her burden, but unconditional understanding and acceptance. These moments built deep loyalty and trust, slowly filling the void left by cruelty and shame. She began to see in him not just the temido hombre da montaña, but a renegade protector with a big heart, who saw her, not her shame or the burden of her physicality. These moments were like small lights, dispelling the shadow of brutality from her past, pointing the way to finding her own dignity and inner self. Strength in this isolated sanctuary. The silence of the cabin, which initially seemed overwhelming, became a space for deep, healing reflection for the protagonist. For the first time in her life, she had the time and peace to confront her thoughts and emotions free from external judgment. She recalled her father's brutality, the bitter taste of public vergüenza from linchamiento, and how she had been treated as a worthless burden. She began to compare that life with her current situation, where she was treated with dignity and respect, and her presence was valued. This comparison was painful, yet simultaneously liberating. She began to question old beliefs about her own worthlessness instilled in her from a young age. The hermit, the recluso, was the catalyst for this change, but it was she herself, in her internal silence, who processed these traumas, piece by piece, reclaiming her identity. She began to recognize her inner strength, the resilience that had allowed her to survive so much cruelty. This was the moment when uncertainty and shame began to give way to newfound ability and hope. Her loyalty to the hermit strengthened, because through him she discovered who she truly was, beyond the labels imposed by society. This internal forgiveness for herself was the key to her rebirth. The culmination of this self-esteem routine stage was subtle but significant changes in the protagonist's behavior, indicative of her inner transformation. Her face, previously marked by shame and deep sadness, began to brighten with a genuine smile. Initially timid, then increasingly frequent. She began to hum softly while working, and her steps became lighter, full of new energy and purpose. She felt capable and useful, not like the worthless burden she had been called her entire life. She saw herself as a true partner to the hermit, not his ward or payment for her father's debts. This newfound hope and dignity were fragile seeds germinating in her soul, taking root in the soil of respect and acceptance. The hermit, the renegade protector, noticed these changes, and his silent acceptance and unwavering respect only reinforced them, solidifying her belief in her own worth. She had not only survived cruelty and linchamiento, but was reborn stronger, with an inner strength she discovered in the sanctuary of his cabin. Her loyalty was now deep and sincere, based on mutual respect and a newfound sense of self-worth. The week of peace at the cabin was brutally interrupted. As Loti and the hermit were returning from the forest, they heard the sounds of unfamiliar horses. Loti's heart froze. The familiar fear from the town gripped her throat. Her hands, once trembling, now strong from work, became sweaty. Their sanctuary had been found. The hermit composed, tensed, his gaze becoming watchful, scanning their surroundings. A shadow fell upon their small world, heralding the end of their peace. Loti felt the return of a heavy burden of fear and uncertainty, threatening her newly found dignity. From behind the trees emerged the sheriff with 2 armed men. Loti knew his hard, ruthless face well, a symbol of law and cruelty. The sheriff dismounted, his gaze sweeping over the hermit, then Loti, with the contempt of a lynch mob. "Man of the mountain," he said in a cold voice, "we've been looking for you. You have debts to the law." Then he turned to Loti with feigned concern. "Girl, I offer you forgiveness and a return to town. All you have to do is testify against this recluse. Your loyalty is now a new currency." The sheriff's words tested her newfound strength and dignity. The sheriff's offer hit Loti like a wave of cold water. Forgiveness? A return to town? The vision of her old life, full of cruelty and shame, momentarily tempted her with illusory safety. But she looked at the hermit, at his silent dignity and the respect he had shown her. How could she betray the one who had lifted her from the dust, who had taught her strength? The demons of shame and the feeling of being a burden returned, whispering of her worthlessness. Her heart pounded frantically, torn between fear and burgeoning loyalty. This was a battle for her soul, for who she had become in their sanctuary. The hermit stood unshaken. His face, though in the shadow of his hood, exuded calm. He uttered no word nor made a gesture that could influence Loti's decision. His silence was powerful, like mountain peaks, a steadfast anchor in the chaos. The sheriff, seeing no reaction, snorted with irritation. "So that's how it is, girl. This recluse doesn't even fight for his burden. Do you really want to sacrifice forgiveness and a return to civilization for someone who treats you like a payment?" The sheriff's words were poison, attempting to undermine her dignity. Loti looked at the hermit's hand, the one that had lifted her up. In his eyes, though hidden, she felt respect, not shame. His Silence was his strength, and for her, a promise. Deep in her heart, Loti felt a surge of new strength. She was no longer the girl thrown to the ground by her father, a burden full of shame. She had gone through cruelty and mob justice to find dignity in the silent sanctuary of the hermit, the renegade protector. She clenched her fists, her gaze hardening. "I am not a payment." Her trembling voice carried echoes of suppressed determination. "I will not return to your forgiveness and your shame. My loyalty belongs to the man who saw more in me than just a problem." The sheriff recoiled, surprised. He expected tears, pleas, but not such strength. Loti stood beside the hermit, her stance expressing unwavering loyalty. The sheriff, though surprised, quickly regained his cold precision. His perfidious smile and eyes full of the old contempt that had once made Loti a burden and a source of shame, returned. "Don't rush, girl," he said, his voice, though calm, carrying a threat. "The town offers you forgiveness. We will forget your past, how you were treated, the lynching you barely escaped. You can return to civilization, to safety. But freedom has its price, doesn't it? Your loyalty to this renegade is now the new currency." He pointed at the hermit, and in his gesture resonated old judgment. The sheriff's words struck Loti, reminding her of the looming threat. Images of the crowd, whispers, insults returned. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy with unbearable pressure. The sheriff used her past and shame to manipulate her future, presenting her with an impossible choice. Was false safety worth betraying the only man who saw true worth in her? Her clenched fists trembled, and her breath grew shallow. An inner battle tore at her soul. She had to decide whether to succumb to the pressure or stand in defense of the truth and dignity she had found alongside the outcast defender. This was not a choice between the illusion of freedom and true strength. Sheriff's words plunged Loti into a deep inner struggle. The tempting promise of forgiveness and an end to her torment clashed with the unwavering loyalty she felt towards the outcast defender. She recalled public humiliations, her father throwing her at people's feet, the crowd treating her with contempt as a burden and a shame. These memories, however, collided with a new reality. Before her eyes stood the image of the protector, his silent respect, strength, and dignity, and a sense of security she had never known. Every one of his glances, every day spent together, had built in her a sense of worth, now brutally tested. Could she betray the man who, alone, saw her as a human being? Or sacrifice her newfound strength for the illusion of freedom? Her heart pounded hard, and her thoughts swirled, trying to find a way through the moral labyrinth. The hermit, though silent, witnessed her struggle, giving her space to make her own decision, which reinforced her dignity and pride. Inner strength. The moment of ultimate confrontation arrived. Loti, full of newfound strength and dignity, faced the sheriff, his men, and a part of the community that had come from town to witness justice. They gathered before the cabin, forming a silent, judgmental circle. Her decision was clear and irrevocable. She would not succumb to pressure. With her head held high, standing in defense of the outcast defender, she publicly rejected the offer of forgiveness that demanded betrayal. Her words, simple yet full of unyielding determination, struck at the hypocrisy of those around them. "I am not yours." Her voice, once stifled by shame, now rang out confidently and loudly, exposing the cruelty that had once defined her. "I am not your burden, nor your property to be sold or bought. And I am not someone who can be forced to betray the only man who saw value in me." Loti defended herself with words, showing how much she had changed. Her words were like a shield, and her posture radiated a strength that surprised everyone, including the sheriff. The confrontation was tense, and the audience's breath was palpable. The sheriff, surprised by Lothi's defiant declaration, quickly regained his cold precision. His perfidious smile and old contempt returned. The outcast defender, who had stood in silence until now, slowly moved slightly forward, his massive silhouette casting a long shadow. He uttered no word, but his posture, once seen as a renegade and hermit, now radiated unyielding strength. The sheriff, seeing this challenge, nodded to his men. "Take them," he snarled. At that moment, the hermit took decisive action. His movements were swift, precise, devoid of unnecessary brutality, yet deadly effective. The first of the sheriff's men fell, surprised, before he could draw his weapon. This was not a thoughtless fight, but a precise defense. The hermit confirmed his reputation, fighting in the service of justice. His powerful actions underscored that he was ready to fight for Lothi's right to exist beyond social judgment. The fight was swift and decisive, demonstrating his unwavering loyalty and uncompromising defense. There was no room for words, only actions mattered. Actions that once and for all dispelled any doubts about his intentions and his role as a true protector. The community that had once wanted to reject her now saw how powerful their combined strength and determination were. The confrontation reached its climax. The sheriff, seeing his men fall one after another under the hermit's precise blows, felt his false justice crumble to dust. The last of his henchmen, overpowered, lay on the ground, and the sheriff, his face contorted with rage and humiliation, stood alone. Lothi stood beside the hermit, emanating newfound strength and dignity. Her presence was as powerful as the protector's strikes. The antagonist was demoralized, his authority publicly undermined. "This isn't over," snarled the sheriff, but his voice no longer held his former certainty, only the echo of defeat. He turned and hastily, with remnants of pride, retreated, disappearing into the forest. His defeat was public, and the witnesses from the town who once scorned Lothi now recognized an unyielding strength and dignity in her. This victory was a triumph of values over cruelty, loyalty over betrayal, and true love over social prejudices. A renewed order was established, not by the law of the town, but by their own internal code. The community that had once rejected her as a burden was now forced to accept a new reality in which her worth was undeniable. Their combined actions proved that true strength comes from within and from unwavering loyalty, which changed everything. After the storm that swept through the town, a profound silence settled, unlike any Lothi had known before. Not a silence of fear, but of tranquility. Lothi and the outcast defender stood together, far from the clamor, within the sanctuary of their cabin, where no one could disturb their peace. Their bond, forged in the crucible of trials and the fight for dignity in the face of cruelty and lynching, was now unbreakable. No words were needed. Their gazes spoke more than 1,000 promises. It was a silent declaration of their shared future, built on mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and newfound strength. Lothi, once a burden and an object of shame, now stood tall, brimming with dignity, by the side of the man who saw her true worth. The outcast defender, a hermit and renegade to the world, was her pillar of strength and partner. This scene symbolized the acceptance of their shared path, affirming that their love and understanding were stronger than any societal prejudices and cruelty. This ending was full of hope and serenity, showcasing the enduring nature of their relationship and their triumph over the past. Their future together stretched out brightly, free from the old burden and promises of forgiveness that would have cost them their souls. Lothi's story illustrates that society judges by appearances, but true dignity resides in those who see the soul. A person's worth is not defined by their burden or shame, but by the strength of their spirit. This is a message about inner power that allows one to discover their true self, even when the world rejects them. Loti, initially a symbol of shame, discovered an unexpected strength within herself through acceptance and respect. Her journey from burden to resilience reminds us that everyone deserves to be seen authentically, regardless of external judgments. The outcast defender, the feared hermit, was the only one who saw Loti's true worth, despite the scorn of those around them. His loyalty and actions taught her that true love and protection mean recognizing inherent dignity and offering unconditional support. Faced with tempting forgiveness and an escape from her old life, Loti chose loyalty to the man who saved her from lynching. This decision sealed her destiny, proving that dignity and loyalty are priceless, and true strength lies in the choices of the heart. And you? When have you felt your worth was underestimated, or someone saw a strength in you that no one else did? Share your story in the comments. Your experiences are important and inspiring to us. If you believe in the power of true loyalty, stay with us. The next story is waiting just for you.